really big challenge in musculoskeletal world. First of all, people come in not because they have cartilage loss, they come in because their knee hurts. And there are plenty of areas where you're not at an osteoarthritic stage, and someone comes in with pain, and it's really hard to differentiate what's causing that. And so this is where I think there's also a role for PET MRI. So the first area might be a neuropathic pain. So one challenge is this structure-function relationship. So it's really hard. There's so much heterogeneity that's present on MRIs. There's so much fluid that's present that's not resulting in pain. And identifying the symptoms that are actually causing the pain is really difficult. And one particular area is in radiculopathies, where this might be really powerful. So here's an example of some of the neuropathic information that FDG could pick up that can be helpful in understanding what is actually causing the pain. Here's an example of a right-sided disc degeneration and nerve impingement. And this person had right-sided pain, and you see that there's increased FDG uptake in that nerve root. Here's another example of an impinged nerve root. This person actually had a left-sided pain, and as you can see, there's no FDG uptake. So trying to identify the source of pain would be quite powerful. Similarly, these have had some really powerful success stories. So here's someone who had ankle pain for 8 years. And the surgeons were convinced that this was due to pain on ambulation, and he wanted to restrict the ankle motion by doing an ankle fusion. But this person actually got an FDG PET MRI, and it actually showed that there was fibrosis of an inflamed plantaris muscle, which was causing pain on ambulation. And so instead of doing this ankle fusion, they did essentially a dissection of the tendon to separate the ankle motion from the tendon motion here, and this successfully relieved this person's pain. We've also applied this to patellofemoral pain. Again, a really big challenge is this is largely nondescript, and PET MRI has been quite powerful in trying to help us identify what's causing pain. So here's an example on the left of, again, maybe you can see this on MRI at baseline, but it was one of many nondescript changes. But on PET MRI, this suggested that there was impingement of the Hoffa's fat pad, as well as inflammation of the patellar tendon in this guided surgical treatment that helped relieve pain. Here's a negative correlation where this person's had multiple arthroscopies that have gone and cleaned out his Hoffa's fat pad, and so he wanted to do it again, but in fact, the lack of uptake on FDG suggested that this is just fibrosis and not the source of this person's pain. So where am I on time? I got a couple minutes? Okay. The last part I'll just go through really quickly, in that, as with all quantitative techniques, the challenges are largely the same. That it's really hard to implement this as an additional sequence that is going to add time, cost, complexity. And so there are loads of different strategies that are being employed that I think are going to be particularly useful as we go forward and try to acquire more and more data to really evaluate these quantitative techniques. So for instance, Calvin talked about MR fingerprinting. That's a way that you can get the normal contrast that the radiologists are used to, while also getting quantitative maps at the same time. We've done something similar with a dust sequence, which gives us these two contrasts, and then we can actually solve a signal model to solve for T2 in this. And so the idea being, well, maybe we can provide all the contrast that the radiologists are used to, so proton density and T2, in a single high-resolution SNR efficient scan that also gives us T2 maps. We do a lot of bilateral studies from a research standpoint. Again, this isn't often done in clinical, but it may have clinical utility, and so this is another thing where we can add value. So the coils today are amazing. Thank you to all the vendors for creating awesome, flexible coil arrays. And one of the big benefits to them is they're largely decoupled from one another. And so this allows us to accelerate across both knees with very limited penalty in SNR. And so we've shown that you can do bilateral imaging without a loss of diagnostic quality or quantitative accuracy. And this is allowing us to do bilateral scans in about 3 minutes that can be reformatted into any plane. And similarly gives us information, quantitative information that we want to evaluate. And then the last part is the workflow. So probably the thing that holds up the quantitative imaging the most is that the workflow is quite extensive. You acquire maybe multiple quantitative methods. Then you have to create the quantitative maps. That's still pretty easy. Then you have to segment all the tissues, and that takes forever. And then you might have to segment the tissues for multiple different contrasts. And this is really challenging, and particularly for translation, this becomes a big bottleneck. And so this is where DL is becoming really useful, and I think we're not quite at a solved problem, but I think we're at a really good stage where the automated methods are getting very close to the manual segmentation. And I think in particular, the big breakthrough that's being done here is that we're now starting to look at our outcome measures as our loss functions, instead of a structural similarity or something of that sort. And so there are now open source tools. I'm going to plug ours. It's called DOSMA. That allow us to go from K-space to implementing whatever reconstruction method you want to create the images that include registrations of different methods, and then creating automated segmentation and then visualization maps. Thank you. And I'm really excited in particular that these are modular. So if you create a method and you want to stick it in here, you can do that. And we'd love to get your code to implement it so that others can do it as well. And so it's been great to see that even some of the vendors have tried this out and implemented their methods. So with that, I hope I've convinced you that there's lots of really exciting and promising quantitative MRI techniques. We're not yet at clinical translation, but there's a lot of avenues where this can make a big impact. And as always, more progress is needed. This is just a general thing for quantitative methods, that we really need to come together as a community to standardize and provide guidance for quantitative imaging, because us technical folks are not usually the end users. And so if we don't get together to give a message to the outside world that are going to be implementing these in trials and other things, then they won't use them. And then we need the end-to-end tools to make analysis quick and robust. So thank you so much for your audience and for the invitation. This is wonderful to be here.